Welcome to the Children's Book Author Podcast. I'm your host, Eleanor Page. If you write for children, or it's always been your dream to, you're in the right place. As the children's book author, I'm on a quest to discover everything there is about writing, publishing, and marketing children's books, as well as how to supercharge my creativity, skyrocket my productivity, and absolutely everything else there is to know about how to be the best, so you can be too. Join me as I interview fabulous guests and become the children's book author. Welcome back to another episode of the Children's Book Author Podcast. Today's interview is with Australian author Amelia Mellor, who is the author of the Grandest Bookshop in the world. And that's a 3-book series. And it's sold more than 115,000 copies. Well, probably double or triple that since this is coming to air, but also because there are now 3 books in the series. And it's a fantastic interview with Amelia. One of the reasons I really wanted Amelia to come on the show, she's a really inspiring, curious, creative. She's got this fantastic research streak to her. And I love the fact that she wrote something that's magical, a magical book, but that it's steeped in history. And this is one of the patterns that I see for many authors who have great success. So I wanted to bring it to you as a potential model of success, because I'm always looking for those things. And so I guess I'm asking you, as you're going through this interview and listening to it, to think about, no matter what you're writing, whether it's a picture book, a chapter book, a middle grade, where could you find some really interesting true history and make it kind of fantastical, make it a children's book, but steeped in that history? It's a really interesting question. She's one example of where I've seen it work tremendously well to not only create a fantastic book, but to also create income for the author. And she's not alone. There are so many examples of authors who have done this. If you start looking, you're going to find that it is a theme. Writers who choose to write something steeped in historical fiction that then they add their own kind of pretend story to. Now, I haven't said that as beautifully as I should have said that, but you get the gist. And even if I think of an adult version of this, not a children's book version, but I think of The Last Kingdom, which is one of my absolute favorite series, written by Bernard Cornwell, or is it Bernard? Bernard or Bernard? Oh, anyways, and it's all grounded in the historical context of the Viking invasions of England, and from memory, King Alfred, when he was trying to actually make everything one nation in Britain. I hope I'm remembering this correctly. And then it's all about Uhtred of Bebbanburg, which is a fictional character, but it's based on this one estate of Bebbanburg that for some reason never fell during that era. So then he's gone and made this fictional story, but sort of grounded in the history. And I hope I've said all that correctly. But at the end of the day, you understand what I'm saying. So as you listen to the interview today with Amelia, just think to yourself, where could you potentially do this with the book? And hey, what a cool experiment to see if it made a difference to sales or outcomes or any of those things. And then, of course, we also talk about her new fiction series, which is complete fantasy. It's an amazing interview. I think you're going to really enjoy listening to how her creative mind ticks. And I encourage you to think about how you can use the information to create something of your own. Because remember, at the end of the day, I always say that from every podcast interview, you should do one action that changes how you operate as an author, or changes or does something or moves you forward. One action from every podcast. and you'll be amazed who you become after a year of listening to podcasts. So enjoy today's show, and I'll see you on the next one. Welcome back to the Children's Book Author Podcast with me, your host, Eleanor Page. And today I am so excited. I'm going to talk all about middle grade writing, publishing, all of it, imagination, fantasy. Oh my gosh. I reckon this will be a 6-hour. No, do not panic. It will not. But I could be. I am so privileged to have on the show today Amelia Mellor. I don't want to say anything else. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. Hi everyone. My name's Amelia Mellor. I'm a middle grade author. I write fantasy, and that includes historical fantasy. I have a teaching degree. I'm Melbourne based, and it's lovely to be on the show.
Wonderful. Oh, I love that you just said all those cute little tidbits. Where do I want to jump in? Tell me a bit about your journey to becoming a writer. Like, where did that all start for you? Are you one of those people who wrote from little, or did
Yes.
you are. Okay. So start from there. Go for it.
Okay. So, family law would have it that when I was 3 years old, Mum asked the classic, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" And I said, "I want to work in a shop surrounded by books that I have written." And then I do remember writing this story in about year 2, a short story in which this family goes fishing, fights a big sea monster, and then eats it for dinner with chips. And then I was writing in my spare time from about grade 3 onward. And what I often say, though, is that I got started in year 11. That's really the first time anyone properly saw anything I'd created. My drama teacher said I did a really good script for an assignment, and she's like, "That was a brilliant script. You want to write the middle school play?" So I did. And that was a defining moment, because that was the first time I'd seen like a big reaction to something that I'd written, and I realized that I had like the power of a god, because like I had managed to think of something and put it in everyone else's heads and affect their emotions and like swept them up into the story. I think we only had 2 nights, but that was more than 500 people over 2 nights. And I just sat in the front row feeling powerful, occasionally mouthing the lines to the girls on stage. But yeah, I had been writing all the way through primary and high school though. I got a laptop in year 6 because I went to a posh school, and I would write on the bus every day, and it was 45 minutes each way. So I'd get an hour and a half of writing practice every day. As a teenager. I went on to do creative writing at the University of Melbourne. I did honours there as well. I took 2 years off, during which I basically just did casual jobs, but I was mostly focusing on writing. I had a studio at Glenfern, which is sadly no more. And during that time, I was writing different manuscripts. I was submitting to different agents and publishers. I got about 45 rejections on 2 manuscripts during that time. And I kept getting little successes. I'd like win this contest or get shortlisted for the Ampersand Prize, or, I'd get a mentorship here and another thing there. I got a rejection at Acquisitions when I was about 24 that almost ended my publishing dreams. That was the point at which I was like, well, this is going to be a lot harder than I anticipated. Yes, everyone said it was impossible to break into, but I thought I was special. But turns out it's a hard industry to break. So I'm just going to go. I'll get a real job. I'll do my teaching degree because I'm pretty good at tutoring. But then a month after I had decided that, almost like basically to give up on publishing. A friend of mine told me about Cole's Book Arcade, and we were discussing it, and I said, gee, it'd make a great idea for a kid's book. Someone should really do it. She goes, you should do it. And then she kept texting me for a week, being like, how's your Cole's Book Arcade story coming along? Um, and so she sort of gave me, the kick up the bum that I needed to keep trying. We went to the Melbourne Museum about a week later together, and also the State Library. And that was where I discovered the Cole children. And that was when the Grandest Bookshop was on. Um, and I mean, if you'll pardon the pun, the rest is history, because Grandest did gigantic numbers once it was published. Although on the way there, I did still get 3 rejections for that book. Um, Even though it ended up going gangbusters, and like working with a firm press has been fantastic, and they did, a great job marketing it and bringing it up to, a truly wonderful standard. Um, they've got very high standards, which I love, because it just their books are great. Not that I'm biased, but yeah, before I knew that their submissions were open, I did submit it to some other people, and it did get rejected. But anyway, when Grandest eventually came out, I was in my first year of teaching. Like, I had written it through doing my teaching degree. I was doing 2 things at once that whole time. It came out during the first year, and I will say disastrous year of my teaching career, because it was the first year of COVID. And I was teaching year 9s. Um, But yeah, Grandest came out to massive fanfare in 2020, and by the end of 2021, I was actually able to leave teaching to write full time. So that's the journey. That was a lot of chat from me, but that's the journey. And now I'm about to launch a new series. So that's where I am now.
Oh, gosh, me. So many things I want to ask about just before you get to the new series.
Yeah, sure. And I didn't even touch on, like, the awards, the international stuff. It's it's quite hard to encapsulate.
Yeah, and I can't believe that it was like, that's not even that long ago. I honestly didn't realize your timeline, that this is all quite, I mean, I still think of COVID days as being quite recent. That's and like you said, a really difficult time. So, you've really gained your success during this COVID period, which is fascinating to me.
Yeah, well, I mean, all of the work of writing it went in long before that. But like, since I started writing Grandest, I think I've moved house 4 times. um, I it ended up, that series ended up being 7 years of my life, which I'm 32. So 7 out of 32 is a big chunk of my life. Yeah.
Yeah. So I heard you say this amazing line. I'm not going to obviously remember it exactly, because it was earlier on in your story, and I was trying to hold it in my head as you were talking.
Oh, sorry, I
Right? No,
rabbited
no,
on for a bit there.
no, you didn't. It was all part of the journey, but I didn't want to lose the question. And the question is, you said, like, back when you wrote that play, and I want to highlight it because I think a lot of people can miss this point. You said, you love the power, but it was really the power of getting into people's minds and affecting their emotions. And, that's what good storytelling is. So, the minute you said that, I went, oh, Amelia's a great storyteller, because she knows what it's really all about. And then as you went on that journey, you wrote certain books, but they didn't quite make it. And then eventually you landed on the one that did. How much of that do you think was to do with that ability to get into, really grab people's emotions and get into their minds with your story? Was it something to do with the concept? Was it your storytelling got better? Like, what happened?
Well, the thing is, I am not one of those shy people who's like, oh no, don't look at my story. Oh, I couldn't possibly share it. I shared those manuscripts to everyone from, you know, my grandpa was a big he look, he didn't quite get all of the steampunk gadgets I was putting in that first story that I wrote that got 30 rejections, but uh, he loved it. He had no idea what it was, but he loved it. And I think the thing is, it's not that the stories didn't grab people because I knew that they did. Um, and there were even times where I shared. Maybe I shouldn't have done this, but I did share, aspects of those stories with kids that I knew, and they loved them. But the difference with Grandest was that it had a much clearer marketing angle. It had that hidden history thing. It was much easier to package to a certain age group. It just had much clearer avenues to sell it. And I will say it also had a better structure. I learned a lot about plot structure through writing those other stories. They didn't have quite the same, classical build up and resolution that I managed to do in Grandest. So it's, I think there's more at work than just the quality of the story. And the factor in, if you're, listeners, if you're getting rejected, it might not be your writing. It might just be that you've written something that's a little bit niche, that's, that currently doesn't have a spot. Um, or a clear angle. I think one of those two that got rejected a lot, I think in a slightly different form, that would be a much easier genre sell now than it was when I was querying it 10 years ago. Oh, was it 10? Not quite. 8 or 9 years ago. Um, yeah, because the market's changed and interests have changed. But yeah, we, as much as we love to think that it's all about the art, you've got to be selling a product that people can't resist as well. Um, it's got to have something to hook them in, and sometimes whatever your fabulous imagination can come up with isn't quite enough. You've got to have something, you've got to lock into something that's accessible and that the market's interested in, and there's actually got to be space for it on the bookshelf as well. One of those two unsuccessful manuscripts of mine, one of those was pitched at the space right between middle grade and YA, and there's still a bit of a gap there, for the 12 to 14-year-olds, there's still not a proper name for that and a proper spot for that in bookshops. I think there will be soon. I mean, it's not too long ago that we started making a distinction between, junior fiction and middle grade, for instance. But sometimes it's just like, where do you put it? Where do you put it in the bookshop? So, yeah, those factors play a much bigger part than I certainly realized when I was querying.
Yeah, those poor invisible children aged 12 to 14, isn't it? They never get
Yeah.
books written for them, which is very, very strange. I don't know what that's
I
about.
mean, people are writing books for them. It's just that the section isn't properly developed, and the books for those ages tend to get shunted up into YA or down into middle grade. Um, yeah, and a lot of YA does skew older, which is, a lot of its readers are older actually. Lots of women in their 20s reading YA. But yeah, I do think that younger teen group really needs we need a name for the genre, and as soon as we've got a name for the genre, there'll be a space for it on the shelf. Not that YA or middle grade are genres, but yeah, when there's a space for the category, I think it'll be easier to sell stories for those kids. But until then, I wonder how many wonderful stories for that age group we've got that are just languishing in slush piles because, the publisher may not know how to sell them.
Yeah, exactly. So tell us a bit about the grandest bookshop in the world. Like how many books? What's it kind of, give me a sort of feel. I don't know. You don't have to obviously remember the premise line unless you do, but what is it about?
Okay, well, The Grandest Bookshop in the World was my debut novel, and it eventually became a trilogy, all of which are set in Melbourne in the late Victorian era. And they centre on this bookshop called Coles Book Arcade from its beginning in, or I tell a lie because the prequel actually came second. um, but in this period, it started as a market stall, and it eventually became this enormous and beautiful arcade. It was a really quirky, real place run by an eccentric and quite progressive bookseller and intellectual and oddball. So what I've done is I've done vast research on Melbourne in that time, especially around Coles Book Arcade, and I've given it a magical treatment. However, some of the weirdest parts of the story are not the fantasy parts. In the first book in the series, The Grandest Bookshop in the World, the Coles Book Arcade has all of these departments. There's a lolly shop, there's a toy shop, there's a greenhouse with live monkeys and talking parrots in it. There's a band. There's a fun house. None of those are made up. The bit where the fun house fills up with water is made up, and the fernery, the greenhouse being bigger on the inside, is made up. None of the departments, though, are fantastical. I mean, they're fantastical in that they were real, but I did not invent them. I guess I should mention at this point that the book, even though the bookshop could be described as a character, it's not the main character. The main characters are the children that lived and even worked around this bookshop. So two of them are the children of the owner. So the owner was called E.W. Cole. He had 6 kids, but he also had a boy working for him who eventually ended up working throughout his whole life for the book arcade. So, my main characters are those children. And in this version of Victorian Melbourne, magic exists, and evil magicians also exist. Or actually, one evil magician exists. So the conflict is driven in all 3 books by this sinister magician character. And a lot of my inspiration for the magician, and especially his puzzles and games, came from the real E.W. Cole's books for children, which had all kinds of weird Victorian stuff in them. Victorian humour is so strange, but one of the things many people will remember, especially if they had the reprints by Mr. Cole's grandson as children, maybe some listeners, pardon me,
Put your teeth back in.
Listeners of a certain age might be familiar with Cole's Funny Picture Book because the grandson reprinted them, but these are full of all kinds of strange things, like one that many people remember and talk to me about is the whipping machine, which is sort of a satirical cartoon of a machine for whipping naughty children in school more efficiently. So there's that. There's puzzles, there's games, there's secret codes, there's sign language, there's, facts about hats of the world and all kinds of really strange stuff, but it's a fascinating little artifact, Cole's Funny Picture Book. So I wove some of the puzzles and poems and stuff like that into my series, even though often it's the villain who's the mouthpiece for them. Um, and yeah, I do edit them though because language has changed. And yeah, some of the clues that would make sense to a Victorian child do not make sense today.
So are the relatives of E.W. Cole, like, do they know about this book? Like, I mean, do they
Yeah,
still, yeah, like, because it's kind of
yeah.
amazing.
So there's sort of two branches of the family that are, maintaining the legacy as far as I'm aware. Um, and they are the relatives of the oldest daughter and the relatives of the youngest daughter. I've been in touch with the relatives of the oldest daughter, who were also the daughters of the grandson who reprinted it. That's a bit of like family tree weirdness for you listeners, but they are the great granddaughters of Mr. Cole. They have grandchildren of their own. That side of the family are they've been um, they've been very generous with their time, and they come to my launches, and they at the very beginning they even gave me some time to tell me a little bit about the family and what they got up to, and even even some advice. One of them said, "Whatever you do," speaking about Mr. Cole, E.W. Cole, "whatever you do, don't call him Edward." Everyone called him Pa or Cole or E.W. And I went, noted. So in my series, no one does call him Edward, which is just as well because his oldest son was also named Edward. Um, so uh, calling him Pa or Cole and the son Eddie, occasionally Edward when someone's crossing him, it just helps maintain that they're different people because when you're looking at the late 1800s, every person is called uh, Edward or Annie or George. There were a few, or William. Um, there's an Edward William and another Edward William and a William Thomas, all like quite close to the centre of Grandest Bookshop. So yeah, some I had to change one of those Georges to a Georgina. It's just like it can be quite it's not like historical fiction in that way is you don't have the same freedoms that you do in general fiction because sometimes you will have multiple Georges, multiple Williams, multiple Edwards. Um, so yes, the question was about the relatives. We've been in touch. Some of them are fans, which is great. Um, and yeah, that was really nice, actually. That was really, really nice. I'm so glad they liked it. And the kids too in that family were just the right age to read and enjoy Grandest Bookshop and the other books in the series. So that was really nice.
Oh, that's so beautiful. How sweet. Oh, it's amazing. And do you think that its success has anything to do with that combination of historical fiction and fantasy? Because I have actually just noted, it might be just a made up noted, but I have noted actually that there's been quite a few successful series where if historical fiction is involved, they seem to do well. And that's even self published people I've noticed this for. So I'm curious, do you think that had something to do with it?
I do. I really I did wonder at the very beginning if I should just do a straight historical treatment of Cole's Book Arcade because it is a fascinating story. But I also think that there was a lack of conflict in it. Like any family, they had their ups and downs, but there was no, amazing escape or anything that would really like raise the stakes. Um, so I think the fantasy element was essential for, you know, writing an exciting story. I think it's, very important for kids' books to be engaging. Um, and I mean, Mr. Cole understood that with his whipping machine cartoon. Um, and yeah, I have noticed kids are really interested in historical fiction because it makes it. Sorry, I'm trying. I'm trying to focus. There's a leaf blower outside.
Oh, I
Um,
can't hear it, so it's all good.
okay, phew. Um, yeah, I think kids love historical fiction. They don't always love studying history because it can seem a bit remote. But as soon as you make it accessible to them and, and they understand what it was like to be a child back then, and they understand, how difficult it was to do daily jobs, and they understand what kind of person a historical figure was as to, as opposed to so and so achieved this in 1870 whenever. Um, when you make it human and accessible, kids and actually adults as well find it much more interesting. So yeah, it's far from the perception that history sometimes has as being dry. It's it's a great way to get kids interested because it's human stories. And one of the really nice things too is that people have always been people. The way that they dress change, and the way that they talk can change. But um, yeah, there's if you can find the moments where what people are doing is familiar to readers now, it just it just opens up the that time in history so much. And yeah, it's it it really is a great way to engage your readers.
Yeah, wonderful. And it gets sales. So, like that's amazing, right? And
Mm,
and so every event I go to in Melbourne, and I'm based in Melbourne too, every event I've ever gone to with children's book authors, the one line I hear repeatedly is, we don't choose this career for the money because there is none in it. And yet I heard you say that you're only a teacher for a year, because then
two years.
2 years, right? And then you went full time. So I'm like, hold on. How did that happen compared to what
Um,
everybody says?
my books did very well. So yeah, it's I think I read it's something like the average yearly income from all writing activities for in Australia is about a little over 18 grand. I don't have that problem.
Well, this is
I
good.
did,
That's why I love that. Like,
yeah,
so
yeah.
yeah,
I won a
exactly.
few I won a few prizes for the Grandest Bookshop series. And then I got a really wonderful deal for my new series as well. Um, Grandest is sold overseas, and when I say Grandest, I mean the whole trilogy.
Yeah.
Um, there's, it I was I don't know if I was fortunate or cunning in writing it in, it's set in the 1800s, because in grade 5 and 6, kids study that period at school, particularly the gold rush and, how people lived back then and stuff. And coal did come across in the gold rush. So, yeah, for whatever reason, for whatever reason, it just did massive numbers. And um, yeah, and I have been able to write full time since originally I was only going to leave teaching for 6 months. 6 months is now 4 years.
Wow.
So yeah, it is almost unheard of, but
Don't say
I'm.
that. It's almost unheard of. I love that. I love that. It's like,
I
no.
mean, it's not common. I'll put it that way. It's not common. Um, and I pinch myself every day, and yeah, I I'm a freak.
I love it. I love it.
I made it.
You did. You did. And that ought to be celebrated. I love that. We'll make the title of this podcast. I made it. With
You're not going to go with I'm a freak?
no. I'll save that as the subtitle. People can find that little jewel as they listen through. And look, the series does have the most beautiful front covers. Like it has been so beautifully packaged, and
Mm.
I,
And
I was
there were some smart people involved in the design as well,
please,
because
yeah, tell me.
um, grandparents remember Cole's Funny Picture Book, and the cover of the Grandest Bookshop in the world looks a lot. Well, it looks similar in many ways. So the cover of Cole's Funny Picture Book is black with a rainbow on it. And what they managed to do was they went for like a dark navy. There's a rainbow on it, but it also shows the arcade. So it's not just a reference for grandparents buying gifts for grandchildren. It's also, you know, a fantastic encapsulation of what's actually in the story. So sorry, Eleanor. These leaf blowers and sweepers are so very loud.
Oh, really? I honestly can't hear them at all.
Okay, thank goodness.
I don't know why, but I honestly can't.
Okay,
Not even a tiny sound,
okay,
believe it or not.
all right. Phew. Sorry.
Yeah, I can't hear them. I wouldn't even know. Um, yeah, and so you said the series also does really well overseas. So does that mean overseas? This sounds like a very weird way I'm putting it, but do overseas children like reading about Melbourne, Australia? That's really what I'm asking.
It seems like they do. The Italians and Hungarians love it. Um, that said, most of what I see from over there is, content from adults. People do beautiful flat lays with the Italian, Hungarian, Korean covers. But yeah, I mean, they must love it because I think Grandest did get shortlisted for an Italian Kids Fantasy Prize once, and I had to deliver a speech in Italian. I do not speak Italian. I didn't win it, but I did like my nominated speech in Italian. Um, uh, and the other thing is when the sequels were announced, the publishers over there jumped on it immediately. That hasn't been the case with every book in the series and every territory that acquired Grandest. But the nice thing about that series is they can all kind of be standalones. So, yeah. And how my new series goes remains to be seen. But I did get a UK deal for my new series, which I'm very excited about.
Awesome. So after the Grandest Bookshop, now is the new series. So that's the two series that you have.
Yeah, yeah.
And
So I did the trilogy,
yeah,
and now I'm on a 5-book high fantasy series, which, look, it's not historical fantasy, but it's definitely got the mark of a history nerd on it. Because there's there's a lot of research that always goes into my process, whether I'm, no matter where on the scale of realistic to unrealistic we're going. I did a lot of pirate research for the first book in my new series, for instance. Lots of whaling research for the next one. So, yeah. There's always a bit of research that goes into my books. So I think people who liked The Grandest Bookshop in the World, The Bookseller's Apprentice, and The Lost Book of Magic will still enjoy and recognise Ocean Forged as having my stamp.
awesome. Ocean Forged. Oh, I love that. And you mentioned it's high fantasy. So what does that mean?
Yes.
The first one is more like urban, a bit urban.
It's
Yeah.
Look, I think people want to avoid the term low fantasy because it sounds
Okay.
like a diss. But and The Grandest Bookshop trilogy often gets called magic realism.
Oh,
I would not say it's magic realism. I think magic realism means like one thing is a little bit different. Something like a Glass House of Stars, definitely magic realism. But Grandest has magic woven throughout its whole world. So I would say that's low fantasy, which means magic or magical creatures in our world. Magic realism is like one thing's off or one thing's strange or magical. Um, and then high fantasy is a non-Earth world um, with magic and stuff. Uh, Often with magical creatures as well. Mine has creatures. They're not magical, but they are monstrous and strange. So, yeah, so Ocean Forge is set in a world that's not Earth. And in some ways, it's quite different from Earth. It's got two moons. Um, and but we don't see the whole world. We only see this one country in it. Uh, and some of the other things you tend to see in high fantasy are um, big quests and battles and stuff like that. So those are associated with high fantasy, but I would say the mark of high versus low fantasy is the world building, really. High is non-Earth world. Anything could be different. Low fantasy is our world, but there's magic.
yeah. And what's the premise? What is this new series about? Tell me a little bit about why I should read it.
Sure.
And I do
So,
read middle grade fantasy. So I am your
brilliant.
audience.
It's some
Middle-aged
of the
women.
most exciting
Yeah.
stuff out there.
Oh, you're definitely your audience, just so you know, not just kids.
So Ocean Forged is the tale of a chosen one who might not be the best person for the job. um, so it follows, of course, an orphan who has suffered in her youth, um, who, while working for some really nasty pirates, discovers a magical gauntlet in hidden in an ancient vault. And it turns out that this belonged to a dynasty of hero monarchs called the Champions of Aquinta. And there were many pieces of the armor, and they all had different magical powers. So now it's up to Corey to find the rest of the armor and save her country from its gradual ruination under the corrupt and incompetent Prime Council. Um, Unlike many chosen ones, she instantly goes, well, of course I'm special and the right one for the job, which may not be necessarily what you want in a leader. But luckily she's got some more level-headed friends to help her along the way. So yeah, throughout the series, our heroes will travel around all of the different islands of Aquinta, meeting different people, meeting different monsters, exploring different environments. Speaking of environment, there's a bit of an environmental sort of theme. And yeah, it's 5 books long. It's for grades 3 and 4 mainly. But I'm trying to write it using that knowledge of literacy that I gained through my teaching degree and my teaching career. I'm trying to make it as accessible as possible for both that younger readership and reluctant readers in the upper primary school grades as well. And I've actually done a lot of rules about the writing style and what kind of names I'm allowed to make up because fantasy can be challenging in its language conventions, particularly in high fantasy. There's sort of an expectation of antiquated dialogue and sort of historical inspired settings. But sometimes things like that antiquated dialogue can present a real barrier. So I've tried to remove those barriers as much as I can, and made up all of these rules basically governed by, would my dyslexic family members find this annoying? If they would find it annoying, I don't put it in. If they would find it okay, it can go in. But that means, no long names, no unintuitive spelling. Um, uh, if I make up words, they have to be made up of real English words already. So I can put them together or I can use a slightly obscure word, but it has to be like, if a kid Googles it, and this is something I learned from Grandest too, if I can interrupt myself. So the baddie in the Grandest Bookshop trilogy is called the Obscurosmith. It's about the only word I made up for the series. I discovered through my website's analytics that kids were Googling it, trying to figure out what it meant. So what I did with the name Obscurosmith, right? It's the obscuro sort of comes from Latin, and that's common in fantasy too. We use Latin roots. But I decided not to do that with Ocean Forged. It's all, this time, if kids look up glister, which is the name of the magic metal in Ocean Forged, they'll find out that glister means something like sparkle. And so that through that they'll be able to figure out the meaning within the story, but they'll also learn a new word that they can use in the real world. So yeah, so I'm hoping that it's supported in that way by that vocabulary knowledge and that information seeking behavior.
Yes, I heard you say in the first series that you were really mindful of, the Victorian era language. So again, I'm hearing, that really kind of reverse engineering from the sort of reader you want to have to create the product that really fits them, rather than just going like, no, that's what they used to do back then. So, kids get on board with that. And I love that approach.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Well, another thing I think we do a little bit too much when it comes to historical settings is often we assume that people talked the way they wrote, and they didn't. I found lots of quotes from the Cole family and a few like newspaper cartoons and stuff. And even though they are from the 1800s, they're written in a much more recognizable style. They don't sound like those, the what we might think of as 19th century language. Sometimes they sound a lot more like us. It's just that their writing was often much more formal than their speech. So, yeah. So even though I've modernized my dialogue in the Grandest Bookshop trilogy a bit more, there are certain words I used and constructions I used that actually were familiar to them. I feel like I see something in historical novels where, even in the late 1800s, characters won't seem to know what contractions are. Like they'll never say can't, they'll never say I'm, they'll never say don't. They did. They didn't always put it in their writing, but they did say those words. Okay has been around since the 1850s. So, yeah. So even though I did modernize my dialogue in that series, and occasionally by mistake I used a word that they didn't use. I mostly got it right. And also, yeah, they often did speak in a much more relatable and human way than we might realize. So yeah, so I did that with that series as well.
Oh, so interesting about okay and things. I didn't know that. That's really fascinating.
Yeah, there's a lot of words that are older than we'd think. And a lot of like, this is getting nerdy, but a lot of our classic Australianisms come from early 1800s criminal slang. So, for instance, copper. You often hear for a policeman, police officer, sorry. But copper for police, you often hear this myth that it comes from constable on patrol. It doesn't. Copper comes from cop, meaning to catch, and that's old. That's 200 years old or more. So that's how we got copper, and cop. Um, and even and you still hear this sense of cop as in to cop something, or if sometimes older people will say something like fair cop, as in fair enough, you got me. So yeah. um
No, it's super fascinating, super fascinating. And
I'm
so,
very into language.
yeah, which is good because that's important. That makes how your characters talk, and that will come across in every word of your book. Sometimes I have this thing where when I'm reading a particular book, I might just be an Eleanor quirk, but if I can hear the author, it annoys me, and I don't know what that means. But sometimes I'll catch them almost like, oh, I'm not reading a book about this. I'm listening to the author. It's a bit like when you're watching an actor. If you forget that it's an actor and you're actually watching the character, you forget that you're watching something made up. And that happens in books. And then I think, I wonder what made that happen. But I don't have the answer. I just know that sometimes that happens to me. So maybe it's to do with that language. I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting because on the one hand, you want to develop a recognizable voice, and I think my books sound like me. Um, I think, and one of my friends said, gosh, Grandest Bookshop sounds like you. And she read out a line. It was something like, a character thought something like, it was outrageously, stupidly dangerous. And that's, it's sort of my cadence. But I do know what you mean
Not quite
when,
that. I didn't quite. It's
yeah.
not quite the same. It's
It's
something
like, I
different.
think I'm thinking of when oh, it was a book I read, and there was it was like a character who's about 15 or 16, and talking they were describing the plants in someone's front yard, but they didn't it just didn't sound like a kid at all. It was not that they knew words they shouldn't have known, because I don't believe in that. If you know the word, more power to you, kid. But something about the way that it was all something about the way the garden was described just didn't sound convincing. So I know what you mean, but it's tough to do, to sort of express yourself without sort of coming out from behind the curtain too much.
Yeah, no, it really is. Yeah. So I mean, certainly not having a go at that, or even actors that do that, because it's really tough actually to be a great actor. It's really tough to be a great author. It's not kind of just like I woke up and became one. It does take years of practice, and studied and were writing since you were really young. So it's a skill, isn't it? Like, it's not just you're born with a talent of it. And I wonder if it's just sometimes we're trained at school to try to sound like authors, or sound smart, or sound writerly, when really it's almost the opposite. It's kind of like sounding like the kids, like you said, their perspective, or what they would see, what they would note about that garden. That maybe
Mm.
that 15-year-old, what would they notice about that garden? Maybe that's what that was off. I don't know. These are just things that I thought, since I had a master writer, I would ask. And coming back for a moment to working with a firm press, and it's funny because I
Yes.
know all my author friends are like that. They have open submission at this time of year, so they've all put their little submissions in. Did you put your submission in that way? Like, were you one of the like when they had their open submission day slush pile people, or did you have an in? And then tell me a bit about what it was like, working with them. You mentioned they have really high standards. And then I'm just going to get all the questions in because I know you can cope with it. And then, like,
Yeah.
when it came to the new series, did they sort of help you develop that? Or, did you get to bounce it off them? Or did you sort of just deliver some perfect new thing they'd love? What is it like in that relationship working with a publisher?
Firm Press. So at the time they were expanding their middle grade list, so that was fortunate timing. But my honours mentor from Melbourne Uni happened to know one of the owners, and so she was aware that they were looking for manuscripts at that time. And yeah, and so that's how I learned of them and that they were, expanding their list and that they might be a good fit. Um, what they asked me to do, we had an initial meeting in which they raved about my early draft of the grandest bookshop in the world. Before we signed anything, they asked me to make some revisions. So I took their notes and I made those revisions. Then we came back for another meeting, and that was when we signed. Um, and I had this happen before with a different manuscript. So I I think that's fair enough if, because publishers want to work with someone who's going to work with them, not put their foot down about every little thing. Um, so I made the revisions as specified, and there were a few changes of editor, but I eventually ended up working with my current editor, um, and we're a fantastic team. So I'm really glad that that happened, even though it was a bit stressful to change through different people early on. Yeah, but I try to be a good collaborator. I try not to be, precious over anything for the sake of it. And I generally only push back when I think that the that there's going to be, more negative consequences than positive if I make the requested change. Um, an example is in The Bookseller's Apprentice, which is it's the second Grandest Bookshop book, but it's a prequel. So I was asked about revising a scene in which the villain does something that sort of forces our hero into action. And I was asked whether he could just be pretending that he caused the disaster. And I was like, it's not going to work. It has to actually be his fault. He has to actually be gloating about it, because otherwise this is not a genuine catalyst for action. So, but the point that was identified was correct. Something about the scene wasn't working, and it was the presence of the authorities. So instead of having cops in the scene, I just gave their dialogue to a different group of people. But yeah, no, I try to be a good collaborator, and I really enjoy working with my team at a firm. We made extensive revisions on my initial concept for Ocean Forged.
Okay.
So some of the really key things changed very early on. And then for instance, the champions were originally just one dead king. Corey and one of the other main characters were cousins originally instead of strangers. But we changed some of that stuff early on, and then I had to, or we decided to write the entire series plan for every book. It ended up many more pages long than I anticipated, but it gives me a nice clear structure to stick to, and it means that I don't get stuck like I sometimes used to get in the early drafts of the other books. So we've got a really defined plan for that. And yeah, wherever possible, I try to be a good collaborator. I'm pretty pedantic about certain things, but I also try to be open with editors and illustrators and even, voice actors sometimes, because, it yes, it is your art, but you've also got to work with people. And something I find myself saying a lot is, that'll work. That'll
Yeah.
work. Let's go with that. That'll work. I don't give myself that same instruction. I go, no, you can do better. Um, but when it comes to working with other people, I go, oh, yeah, quite often. So, yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it does. It does. And I love
Okay.
that. I love you said several times, the collaboration and the flexibility, but also staying true to yourself. And yeah, I love that. That'll work. Yeah, that'll work. That kind of works.
Yeah,
And I know I've kept you so long, but I've got a few more questions. So,
absolutely.
okay. Um, right. So when it comes to your writing approach, right? Like, and let's talk about the current series because that's where you're at today. You've obviously developed as an author. You've got this great outline. What does it look like to get that written for you in your true life? And do you have to mix in school visits or public events, or I mean, how do you manage all that?
Yes. So at the moment, I'm working on the second book in the Ocean Forge series, which is called The Silent Island. It's the second draft, and I get very frustrated when real life gets in the way of writing. When I have to answer emails, when I have to go to schools. I mean, I love going to schools, but having to move house in the middle of redrafting Silent Island was a
Mm.
bit of a pain. And I there's times, this is spoilers for the Lost Book of Magic, by the way, but in that series, we discover that one of the reasons that the villain is the way that he is because he's done all these spells on himself so that all he does is create. Like, he doesn't sleep, he doesn't eat, he doesn't, like, I don't think he washes, but we never mention it. Because he's done all this magic on himself to make him to like remove all human limitations. I can't promise that I wouldn't do that if I could. There's times when I'm like, oh, I just want to create. Why do I have to wash my hair? Why do I have to go to sleep? Um, Especially when I'm on a time crunch, which for Ocean Forge, I'm on a pretty serious time crunch. I'm turning those books around in, drafts of that around in a couple of months, whereas it was more like 8 months for a Grandest Bookshop book. Now they are half as long, but I'm still under the pump.
And that's per
Um,
draft. Sorry to interrupt. Is that per
yeah.
draft? Okay. And how many drafts do you generally have to do?
So each one is shorter than the next, but usually there are three significantly different drafts. So yeah, the will coming back to your question about the collaboration is I'll submit a first draft. I'll get a big and very useful list of revisions to make. Then I write the second draft. Then we'll usually progress to, look, we call it the copy edit, but we change so many things during the copy edit that it kind of feels like doing another draft because I will change entire chapters, entire paragraphs. So there mainly are three really different drafts. And then whatever we've done at the end of the copy edit, that might end up being, for instance, the version that goes into the advanced reader copy. But there still will be small revisions right up, sometimes right up until the book goes to print. So, yeah, to come back to your question about do all I want to do is write, yes. I do find the school visits really energizing. I don't find grocery shopping very energizing, or taking my car to get serviced, or doing my business activity statement, or fielding a million emails. I know it's necessary to promote the books and to run the small business, but yeah, the creating is the fun part. The being a small, running being a writer as a business is much less fun, and maintaining the machine that does the writing is not as fun either. But yeah, I
I love
mean,
that. I love the way you go and maintaining the machine that does the writing,
well, I mean,
meaning yourself.
sometimes, yeah, look, is it messed up? Maybe. I do still make time to do nice things.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I like to go for a walk every day. And I have, weekly meetings with friends. Um, but yeah,
Mm.
to answer your question, sometimes I do just wish I could write and nothing else.
Yeah, well, that's the
If
sign
I
of a true writer, isn't it? Like that's why you've managed to succeed at it. And does a firm press do a lot of the marketing for you as well, or is it really driven mostly by you?
They do a lot of the stuff that involves connections. So they get in touch with the bookshops. And I feel like I'm going to show that I don't know much here, but they do have wonderful marketing. They, however, me putting stuff out is part of that strategy as
Mm.
well. So um I see their marketing strategy. They share stuff with me, and part of that involves making my own content to promote the book, and sometimes to promote myself. Um, sometimes I'll make videos where they're like, you know, we're going to send this video to such and such. Show us your personality, which I love to do. I'm a show off. So yeah. It is a team effort, but they're also really good at marketing. They're really good at what they do. It's I'm really glad that they handle the stuff that they handle, because I can handle creating content. I can handle, funky little flat lays and videos and stuff, but having connections to various book bookshops and reviewers and stuff like that, that's valuable. That's really valuable. I don't know how they do that,
Yeah,
because I
or
can't do
getting you
that.
or getting you on this podcast. They did that too.
Indeed. How? I do not know.
How you don't know? Yeah, exactly. Well, you did have to book in a time and turn up, so you still did something. 100%. And with my last question, I promise, but with school visits, do they help you decide what to present, or are you cheating because you're a teacher? It's one of my favorite questions to ask people. You're cheating. I do. That should become my line. You're cheating
Is it
because you're a
cheating or is it
teacher.
lesson
Yeah.
planning? Is it teaching or is it lesson planning? I often do have a set of lessons that I will take in depending on what a school is after.
But
I
give
do
me
like.
tips. Give someone like me who's terrified and has still not been brave enough to do a school visit properly.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
And yet I
Well, if
am a bubbly personality, but I'm terrified of students and teachers, but teachers mostly. And my biggest terror is that they're all going to go like, what is she on about? Why is she wasting the class's time? All the kids are just going to be like, boring. So how do you approach school visits as an author and as having been a teacher? Tell me a bit about that. Will you be the author that gets me over the line? Although
sure.
Adrian Beck said he was going to wrap me up in tape and like Hannibal Lecter, load me into an auditorium and set me free and just put me on the spot. But that was his approach. What is yours, Amelia?
Well, what I often do is I'll do a sort of interactive presentation, history presentation, but that's only when I'm focusing on the Grandest Bookshop series, because, I've got some really interesting historical photos in there. And so I'm telling the story, the true stories behind that series throughout that presentation. If you don't have a really wild historical topic to lean on, it helps to have a learning intention to go in with, um, and you've got to give the kids something to do during that session. So I do a lot of workshops, and it can take a bit of practice to get used to a 45-minute or an hour block, but once you know what kids of a certain age can achieve in a 1 hour block, then it becomes much more achievable. So you'll go in with a learning intention about crafting dialogue or using real people to create characters. That's one that I do. So yeah, if you go in with a learning intention and then you proceed to explaining, or what they call explicit teaching. No, before that. So you go learning intention, you go, what do we already know? You go explicit teaching, you open it up to some more student exercises, starting with working with them on something and then proceeding to them working independently. And then usually at the end of the lesson, you can have 5 to 10 minutes of sharing, and that's it. So
Nice.
yeah, so to recap, you'll want your goal so they know what you're doing, review so you know what they already know, explicit teaching, working together, and then working independently.
Oh, I love this framework. This is gold.
Makes
sense.
Most lesson plans are constructed that way. It depends on the subject, and it depends on, the state that a certain project might be in, but that's a very common structure. And it's incredibly helpful.
Yeah, it's so helpful. And I love that you said, like the age that you're teaching, is it doable for them? That makes sense. Yeah, so good. So good. Well, I can't wish you more success for Ocean Forged. I hope it goes wildly through the roof. I'm sure it will.
Thank you so much. The Wicked Ship is the first book, and that'll be out on the 29th of July.
Well, I'd better get this episode out before then, hadn't I? Yes. Bad, Eleanor. Or good,
You
Eleanor.
don't have to.
Yes, we'll get it out before then. And no,
I can say something different. I can say out now.
Already out, because Eleanor was late to release the episode. It'll go out when it goes out, but I'm sure it's so exciting for you to have a brand new series go out into the world and just see how that's received. And it's something a little new and different and unique from you, so really is the next step of your author journey. So I wish you so much success with it. Thank you so much for being on the show and sharing all your amazing insights, your own personal journey. And I've learned so much about writing middle grade and just about being a middle grade author. I love it. I love it. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Eleanor. Thanks for letting me waffle on for such a long time. Rarely do I get the opportunity.
Did you find that interview valuable? Great! Now be an awesome human and go and leave a review, because it helps the podcast out so much. Want to read the show notes? Check out the children'sbookauthorpodcast.com. Want to find out more about me, Eleanor Page? Find me at eleanorpage.com, or come and say hello on social at Eleanor Page Books. Until next time, keep writing and keep learning.